So yes, I am currently Group Operations Director for Belvoir and I've been there 5 years, although I have worked there before, which is why it's been to know me of old. So today I'm going to focus on talking about the Renters Reform Bill, and then a few other sort of extra bits of reminders just to check that you're all doing your homework or doing what you need to do. This clicker's not going to work for today, so I'll just click myself. So the current strategy behind the PRS is based on these two white papers that the government wrote. So obviously at the moment we currently have a Conservative government, and we've got the fairer private rent sector. The clue is in the title with all of these things. So they're saying our new deal for renters will help to end this injustice by improving the rights and conditions for millions of renters as we level up across the country and deliver on the people's priorities. So I think you can see which sort of element of landlords and tenants these sort of general premises come from. And then the Levelling Up White Paper, which was their big release around a number of different facets of their plans. The Mission Statement 10 was the one that was relevant to properties. So they will ensure that by 2030, renters will have a secure path to ownership and the number of first-time buyers increasing in all areas. The ambition is for the number of non-decent rented homes to have fallen by 50%, with the biggest improvements in the lower performing areas. So the Renters Reform Bill was the vehicle that they professing are going to deliver on these two principles. Okay, so it was the brainchild of Boris Johnson's government, and Michael Gove in the housing sector is the man who's driven this initiative for years. But of course, as you might have seen in politics, there's been a fair bit of change. So yeah, we had our 15th housing minister when I wrote this. She was number 6 in the last 12 months, and we've now got our new one, Lee Rowley, which we know not a lot about in terms of where his directives come from. But he is set to deliver what Rachel had just about got into Parliament when she was ousted for leaking information. So we'll see what Lee Rowley delivers. So I'll go through what this bill involves, and it is long and it's big, so I'm going to try and break it down to be as simple as possible. But the first thing I'm going to say about it is there's really not a lot in this bill that actually worries me when you break it down to the component parts. Now, that's not what you'll get from the headlines, because that's around, as Dylan said, winning votes, and it's around making you scared so you react in the way that they want you to react. But actually, when you know what you're doing and you have a good agent, and actually it's not just about good agent. I've been a landlord for years, and I can promise you when I was doing it before I got back into the compliance element of estate agency and lettings, I was doing all sorts of things wrong. I think it's impossible to do it all right and keep up to date. I don't think it's even possible for Davinder to do it. If I wasn't sat in central office doing a full-time job, scouting around, giving the advice of what to do and put it in the processes and how to get it in time. So I think it is really challenging. But once you know what to do, and you've got someone doing it for you, it's fine. And I'll tell you why. So the Renters Reform Bill is currently at the committee stage, as you can see on here, so it's still got a long way to go. It was quite painful getting it to that point, and there was a lot of delays, and there were lots of talk about it, really. And I spent quite a bit of time through the Lettings Industry Council speaking to various policymakers, so I have a better idea and understanding of how much time and energy they're putting into things at any one point. And it has been definitely an up and down where you think they're on the go and then they take their foot off the pedal and then you beat them for a while. But it definitely is full steam ahead in terms of the amount of time and effort and money they're putting into this. So the bill has got to the House of Commons, and it's had its first and second reading, and it's now at the committee stage, which means there's been, and you can watch it on TV if you're ever bored when you're doing ironing, there have been 3 or 4 days of detailed talks with experts, including some of the people and some of the papers that I've written for, and they've also got a 114-page table of amendments to this bill, which luckily I won't go through. But that's where it sits. And to give you an idea of the timeline then, if this bill is going to get to the finish line and get enacted, we're currently, as I say, at committee stage, and if they can get it in, and this is the key point, they need to get it in before an election. Because obviously, if they don't win the election, then Labour, if they got in, would make some changes, and they'd have to take the process back and start, not necessarily start again, but start a long way back. Having said that, my ear to the ground think that Labour would take this bill forward although in a slightly different form. They would move it forward, and it would be one of their priorities. So you'll hear people saying renters reform bill, there's no way they're going to get it in time before the election, don't worry about it. I'm not saying that's a silly thing to say, it's just that chances are that they're putting this much effort into it that we might get there before the finish line, and if they don't, it looks like Labour will do something very similar. So I think we're kind of in for this general premise. It's got cross-party support. So with a good wind, I reckon by about June 24, we should be looking at the first parts of the bill being enacted, and that will be our legislation that will be in place, and there will be a number of elements that will be delivered into it, and that will be for new tenancies. So they'll come in and they've said to us, they'll give us about 6 months notice for changes to new tenancies, and then another 12 months after that, so looking at the sort of back end of 2025 for all your existing tenancies. So even if it goes really well, we have plenty of time to implement things. And it could all be totally different next week, so that's best intel as of now. Okay, so what's in it? So, first principle, there's 12 aims in it. First one, to halve the number of non-decent homes. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the initiatives until later slides when I kind of give you the detail of what's in the actual bill itself. Run pilot schemes with councils in the worst areas to enforce standards. They want to give councils more money and more immediate powers to be able to take action against the worst offending homes. The big headline grabber, abolish Section 21, no-fault evictions, and deliver a simpler, more secure tenancy structure. And that for me is the biggest one actually that I'm just not that worried about, and I'll tell you why. Reform grounds for possession and expedite the most serious offences, so where they're taking away with the getting rid of Section 21 notice. Everyone happy to know what Section 21 notice is? I don't want to educated crowd. They're giving with more grounds on what we call Section 8 grounds, the other way that you can get people out of your property. Put limitations on frequency and method of rent increase, which again sounds very frightening, but I think it's no different to what we're doing now. And introduce a landlord ombudsman. Reduce delays in court proceedings and increase mediation, which is a lovely idea, but they haven't quite worked out how they're going to do it yet. I'm sure they'll tell us soon. Introduction of a property portal covering landlord compliance and offences. Increasing local council powers to investigate and fine. No blanket bans on children or housing benefit recipients. Giving tenants the right to request pets in the property. And to investigate passport deposit solutions. So that was the principal aims of the whole thing at the beginning. And I will tell you where we have ended up. Now I'm going to try and break this down so it's easy in your head to try and retain to 3 main areas. So in the Renters Reform Bill, we've got changes to the tenancies, how the tenancies actually work, compliance with property standards and portals, I'll go into that. And then the actual property standards, the state that your property is in and the minimum requirement for that to be. Okay? So 3 main sections. And the biggest one, the biggest changes that we've got is changes to your tenancies. So, getting rid of Section 21. Hands up anybody who thinks or knows that they've had a Section 21 served on a property they own. See? They're not used very much. You could have all put your hand up then, but I had another answer if you did. Secondly, most of us who use Section 21s use them when we should be using a Section 8. Most of us want to evict somebody because there's a reason for it. And if there's a reason for it, it's going to be covered under the Section 8 ground. So getting rid of a Section 21 to us and to the actual percentage of people that have a Section 21 that could not have had a Section 8 served against them is pretty much nil. So why are we panicking? So we're panicking because we're being made to panic because we're being told that we're losing our security of tenure in our homes, but in homes that we own, but that is just not the case. So what they're having to do with that, if you just skip down to this one here, is the 2 areas that wouldn't be covered in the current Section 8 is if you want to sell the property. There isn't a way of doing that under the current Section 8. So they've already drafted a ground that says that if you want to sell your property, then you can serve a Section 8 notice. And the other one is if you want to move back into the property yourself, or a close family member wants to move in. And again, they put a new ground for Section 8 to make sure that that can be served in exactly the same way that Section 21 was. Okay? I can't think of any other reasons that aren't covered. Now, there is a reality that the reason we all liked Section 21 is because you didn't have to tell them what they'd done wrong. So it's much more kinder. It's less controversial, but the government don't really mind if you're being kind or not. They want you to give them a reason and then go down the Section 8 route. So that's what we'll do. And so there's no real issue with that. Remembering that Section 8 notices normally have a much shorter notice period. So again, not a problem, not a problem for the landlord. Okay, so having said all of that, to get this bill through to the committee stage, because there was some dissent amongst the Conservative MPs, quite a few landlords in there, they have said that they are going to hold off, even if this act gets through in the timetable, hold off abolishing the Section 21 until the courts have improved their processes enough to speed up the Section 8 notices, because we all will be aware that the courts are taking far too long. It tends to be between 4 and 8 months to actually get someone from serving the notice to eviction. So they're saying they understand that if they're going to remove Section 21, they have to give landlords confidence that they're going to be able to remove people who aren't behaving correctly from the property, and to do that in a more expedient way. So they are looking at the different channels of having more online means, more mediation, and having some sort of expedited process where the facts are clear. So that really is how long is a piece of string. So this Section 21 now could be going from any time from 2024 to whenever they feel. So there's no parameters around it. It's when they feel the courts are ready to cope with the removal of Section 21. Removal of ASTs and reversion to assured tenancy. So for me, this is actually the bigger one, and it snuck in. It wasn't really in the first principles of it. Some of the older generation may remember before we had an assured short-hold tenancy, which essentially means this where you can remove somebody after the fixed term's finished. And we really go back to an assured tenancy status where they have a bit more security of tenure. So that being, we can't get them to leave the property unless we serve a Section 8 or any of the new ground notices. So they have a right to stay there until that notice is served, rather than the landlord just being able to serve notice at 2 months any time after the fixed term. So that is quite a change. What we say really is that the nature of the tenancy is periodic. So the tenant will be able to move in, and after 2 months they'll be able to leave. Okay, so we don't get to serve notice on them, but they can leave at any time. And this is around the government wanting tenants to be able to have the security to live there as long as they wish, but to be mobile in terms of job market and family needs where they want to as well. So that one might frighten you more, because if you take that conceptually, Davinda could be charging you fees every 2 months as these people keep coming in and out and in and out and in and out, and you're doing let fees. But this has happened in Scotland about 3 or 4 years ago, and the length of the tenancies has barely changed. People don't want to move house every 2 months. It's really expensive and it's really disruptive. So in practical terms, the way people live their lives are not going to change just because they can move out. And in all honesty, I think people would agree, if you've got somebody who's deeply unhappy in a house, we won't want them there anyway, neither do you, because it's a pain. They create difficulties. So generally, I don't think that's going to, again, on the ground, make a huge difference. No written rent increases. So at the moment, there's lots of different things we can do in a tenancy, or even if we're silent in a tenancy, to increase the rent. But we only increased it once every 12 months anyway, and that's what they're saying. You can't increase the rent more than once every 12 months, and it's not something that you can prescribe into your tenancy agreement. You have to use what's called a Section 13 notice. So it's a notice that says, we're going to give you notice to increase the rent. This is what we propose. It can be market rent. So that is, so you can actually ask for what you like, but one of the main changes around this is that they all have the entitlement and are told that they can go to a rent tribunal, and if they don't feel it's fair, then they can do that at no cost, and then they will arbitrate at what market rent is. But the key point is it's market rent. Okay, so there's no suppression of rents, it's market rent. And the agents will be very good at working out what those should be and kind of managing those elements. One thing I would say is, I think it is important that your house is roughly at market rent now, because it's going to be a lot more palatable when you're doing the increases if they're measured. So if you are sitting on a house that you've been kind of having a really nice tenant in and you haven't done too much work and you've left the rent where they are because you really like them, just bear that in mind, that you might have more of a challenge once this comes in. So we've done the Section 8 notices, the new ones. Yes, so one of the challenges that, if you've been unlucky and you've had to serve a tenant notice for rent arrears, was that they have to have 2 months arrears for you to really get that mandatory level of eviction, to be sure you're going to get them evicted for rent arrears. And what can happen if they're clever is they can just dip the rent arrears below the 2-month point just before you go to court. So there's a new ground that they're introducing, that if a tenant's gone into more than 2 months arrears 3 times in a 3-year period, that will also be a mandatory ground for eviction. Okay, so that's just a useful one to have in case, which again gives you this confidence against the Section 21. Tenants having the right to request a pet. This, if you think about those principles at the beginning, this is about giving people the same sort of feel and rights as somebody who owns the property. So they are going to insist that you consider a pet in the property. You can refuse it if it's reasonable to do so, and obviously there is very little guidance on what reasonable is. I thought they were going to, if you had a superior landlord or a head lease that said you couldn't have pets, I thought that would suffice. But the big amendments that they've tabled has a lot of detail around what would be considered reasonable, and I don't think it's going to necessarily fly that if your head lease says that it's not acceptable, it will automatically mean a no. I think they're going to override it with this statute. So that was sort of a bit of a get out that probably isn't going to be allowed. Might have some if your insurance obviously doesn't allow it, but apart from that, that's unlikely to work. So what you can do though is demand that they buy a special tenant pet insurance that covers you for damage that the pet does. So there was a thing that came in a bit ago called the Tenant Fees Act, where we can't charge tenants for a lot of things. This is going to override that, and you can insist that they buy tenant specialist insurance. But there are issues that you'll need to make sure that the agent's having to look at what the policy's like, make sure it's checked regularly, it's still in place, that kind of thing. So that's something that we'll put into the process and individual will do, I'm sure. Universal terms of non-tenancy. Now this is an interesting one. We have done a lot of work in Wales, who had a whole new regime a bit like this recently. So at the minute, we all have our own tenancy agreements. There's nothing really to say. We don't even have to have one in writing. We can have a verbal one. So this means that every single tenancy will have to have a set number of terms. Now this can be a nightmare. In Wales, it's been a nightmare. So they've got really one of 2 main options. One is to create a standard form that basically is maybe 3 or 4 pages, a bit like the prescribed information you have to give with deposits, and you'd fill all of that in, and that would be the universal terms. So that every single tenancy that's compliant in this land will have this 4-page sort of universal terms. That's quite straightforward and easy for us to do. What's a lot less easy, especially if you're managing yourself, is they might give you like Wales have this template that you have to turn the contract into, and then you've got these tenancies that are live and running, and you have to make everything kind of work with this new tenancy and point out where it's different. So it's actually incredibly difficult. So I'm hoping, obviously we've put our suggestions forward and through Letters Industry Council, that they go down that sensible route. That's something that Divinda can do easily. If it's the difficult route, something Divinda will do, which is going to be very hard, but we'll work together on it. And the antisocial behaviour grounds, they are widening and making the notice shorter, because they recognise that that's one of the areas that's important to help create decent homes for everybody.
Is it possible to ask a couple of questions?
Of course it is.
The first one is, when you say that they're moving to an assured tenancy, which means there's no fixed term.
Assured tenancy, I say that and revert to that because it's got the similar rights where we can't get them out. That's what an assured tenancy was, where if you had an assured one, it meant that they were there really until they chose to go. Whereas the assured short hold had that even-handed on both sides where we could serve notice. But it is a periodic birthday where
It's
it
still
would just
periodic.
be, it would just always be a periodic from the beginning, so there is no fixed amount of time the minute the tenants have to stay. So they've got to give 2 months notice. If they've moved in the door, moved in, and served notice on day one, they can do another 2 months.
What I'm where I'm coming from is, if I decided I wanted to let a house for 6 months while something else was going on, but I knew it was only 6 months that I wanted the people to be in there, would I have to go to a Section 8 to get them out after 6 months?
So what you do is you move in, you'd probably be honest because you're not a person, you tell them it's only 6 months, but you can't actually do one for 6 months. So at month 3, you would then serve your note, no, you can't. So you can't do it too short. When you're going to be moving back in, you've got to give them an initial 6 months and then you've got to serve your notice. So you wouldn't be able to move it, you wouldn't be able to get it back in 6 months. You have to wait until 6 months is over and then serve a notice in Section 8.
If they move in, and I let them stay for a year, but I know in a year I'm coming back into the country and I want to move in, at some period, do I still have to serve a Section 8?
Yeah.
So does that increase the cost of, will a Section 8 cost me quite a lot of money?
Not really. I would probably about, what's it, 200 quid? Yeah, exactly, something like that. Yeah, £100 to serve. And of course, there's always the risk that people don't leave, which is why you would probably be upfront before they let it, that you understand you can't rent the property for a 12-month period, because you give them a lease for as long as they want to be there, but you are going to be serving that notice in 6 months' time to move back in, at month 12, so you'd be honest about it, and then you would serve your Section 8, and then they're likely that they would go as they do now. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions on that?
Yeah, I've got one more. If you were doing a rent increase,
Yes.
and the tenant, it became sort of quite obvious that by having a going saying, oh, I want to go to tribunal on this, presumably that would mean that the rent increase was postponed for, I don't know how long it takes to go to court.
This is the detail. Now I'm trying to remember. I think it would for a period, but it's not for very long. If they're very delayed on the tribunals, I think they can either put it back or it comes in. So I know the delay is not going to be that long until you can have an increase. I think you can do it, they might do it, or if it's a certain amount of time, maybe more than a certain number of weeks, they say you can bring it in and then they will backdate it. Thank you, yes, exactly.
Can I ask a question about that? Because, I mean, a lot of tenancy agreements have a thing about rent increases saying, you know, it's linked to CPI, RPI, whatever, and you will get an increase depending on what that is once a year. So under the new system, how do they work that out?
It's market rent, so so nice and grey to a degree, but it means they will, you know, in the same way that Linda does, they will look and see what properties are available and see what that standard is, and then they will arbitrate on whether they think what you've done is a reasonable market rent increase for what's there at the time.
So you can't actually decide yourself.
You can't do your CPI or, you know, those things, that those metrics are gone now. It's not you can't put those mechanisms in, or unless they change the legislation, because all of these things, as I say, are still going through those stages which may tweak, but that's the current plan. So that's the new tenancies bit, and that's the most complicated bit, and there is quite a lot in there. Compliance is really about this new landlord portal, which will be mandated, and will hold lots of information about you, about the property, about the safety, your gas, your electric. I don't think they know exactly when they will have it ready to have all the level of information, but I think it will probably come out to a lower standard where they'll have the key landlord information, and property information first, and then I imagine it will build. I know that they're talking to various different sort of IT solutions at the moment. But that will have, and this is the point of this obviously, is to have an easy place for councils to be able to monitor the compliance. And, you know, actually I think it's a good thing because we're all doing everything properly, and we don't really like it when we're having to do everything properly and other people aren't. So it's a way of, if you haven't got anything to hide, then we shouldn't worry about it. These are all things that we're doing, and we'll put it on there. And it will help us know that we're compliant, and it's something that we will, obviously as agents, we will make sure we do as much of as we can. The landlord mandatory registration with an ombudsman Again, that's going to be, there'll be a small cost by the looks of it, that you will need to register with the Ombudsman so that the tenant can make a complaint. And we've been with an Ombudsman, mandatory as agents for years, and it's actually a fabulous thing to have, because when you just can't come to an agreement, you can refer it to them and it's arbitrated, and it's not expensive for anybody, and it's a much better route to settling any issues. So again, not frightened of an Ombudsman. Might get a little bit confusing because we've got the agent's Ombudsman and the landlord's Ombudsman, but that will wrinkle out in time, I'm sure. So they're the two sort of main new areas on the compliance side from the legislation.
What kind of data will they hold on the landlord?
Well, it will be name, it will be address, because obviously that's something we managed to shield from at the moment, but we don't know exactly what will be available to whom as well, how much of the information will be available to which users. I haven't got the detail of that yet, but there will be.
It's going to be GDPR compliant anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last one is the property standards, and we've been told that they are working to align the Decent Home Standard with the PRS. So the Decent Home Standard is currently only relevant to the social housing sector, but they are looking, I believe, or they're working at the moment on tweaking that piece of legislation. So at the moment we've got the health and safety rating system, and lots of the elements of that are very similar to this. So again, lots of them are quite comparative. There are a number of key differences. At the moment, one being that there's an arbitrary date on things like bathrooms and kitchens, that you should replace them. But remember, that's under the social housing, and my information, whether it's right or wrong, is that they are looking to change that. So it won't necessarily be an arbitrary line that you need to replace kitchens and bathrooms every sort of time period. It is enforced in a different way to kind of the health and safety risk rating system at the moment, but again, we don't know if they're going to change how that is done. But one of the things that they've done in the amendments that they've scheduled is that rent repayment orders currently can be up to 12 months. So that's why if you've done something wrong, a tenant can say, I think I need my rent back because I've been, this standard has been breached. They have increased that to up to 24 months. So, or potentially that's what they've tabled to put into the regulation. So, they're not messing. They do want us to comply with these standards. And again, what we'll have is I'll do a checklist, and our agents will go and do, before it comes in, a decent home standard checklist. And then we'll make sure that if there's any work that needs doing, then obviously we'll give plenty of time and get the right people to be able to do that. But lots of it is very comparative to the system that we've got already. It'll be interesting to see if they align anything with EPCs, because the big thing that I was very frightened about as the landlord and as an agent was bringing that minimum EPC to a C so soon. And obviously the government have fully backtracked on that for the moment. But again, who knows what will happen over the sort of next few years. So we're not saying it's gone for good. But I think for now it definitely was a bit of a sign. I believe we've got a bit more time to be able to look at the EPC side of things. I think if they bring an element of the EPCs in but make it more of a carrot for us all, so give us some good funding sources and give us some good outcomes for improving our EPC efficiency, I'm hoping that's the way they go rather than bringing in an arbitrary date again. But I'm sure there'll be an element of that in the Decent Home Standard. So this is just about the bits of tweaks and changes. So the main things that have come out is, as I said, the introduction of the Decent Home Standard is in the latest table of amendments. The no blanket bans on children and people on benefits was not in the original regulations, it was out. But they have tabled to bring that back in. I suspect most of us won't be as worried about the children. I'm not quite sure how they'll deal with over 55 complexes. I imagine they'll find a way around it. We are still absolutely allowed to do affordability checks and referencing. So that criteria is still allowed, and that's what we've always been doing. So as long as those are done correctly and guarantors are used if needed, then we should be able to work within that. Any student landlord property? Any landlords, student landlords? Need to worry about that one. Because there is something that's coming in to help with that, because one of the challenges is how do you re-rent your student properties if you have open-ended tenancies? You don't know when they're going. So how can you rent it for the next year's students? So the poor students were looking for a rough ride if they didn't. And then the delay in the abolition of Section 21, as I mentioned. Okay, so that's where we are currently. And then what can you be doing? So as I said, don't rely on the headlines for your source of information or advice. ask Davinder, talk to people that know, keep an eye on what's happening in government obviously and who those kind of key housing roles are and what their general sort of direction of travel is. We do write sort of updates and sort of we do landlord letters and newsletters and things over Davinder, so keep an eye on those. If there's any key information, Davinder will be sending you something about it. If there's anything you need to do, we'll be telling you what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and we'll do it for you. So you know, that's part of what he does. And if anyone does want to write to their MP, we do have a I wrote a sort of detailed, there's no point writing saying you don't like this, they're just not going to listen, that's not what they want. We've got a very detailed letter that we've sent and actually got some really good responses from Rachel and Clete to various MPs around the country, because we had some kind of really specific things to say. So if you want to get that, then I can make sure Davinder has a copy so you can write it. And then what we are doing. So I've just worked with the Letting Industry Council. We've kind of written papers on the draft regulations, and then we try and get the papers to the right people who are looking at the consultations and looking at the policymakers. And I have some meetings with those individuals when they have certain topic areas they want to get neighbours' advice on. And the main areas has been that we want to make sure, the big one for us is we've got to make sure these courts are ready to deal with these section notices. And so that is key. And it was good that they've listened, but now we need to see how they're actually going to improve things, what they're actually going to change to reduce the waiting time on the evictions. Making sure that the wording on these Section 8 grounds, because they have to be nice and clear for us, because if we're going to go to court under Section 8, we want to know what evidence we're going to need when we get there, because the last thing we want is for it to be chucked back out, and then we've got this process going longer and longer and longer. So, you know, we're really keen to get very clear evidence of what we need if we are going to get an eviction against a tenant. I talked about students, and also just around other unintended consequences. So there are a few little bits when I look at the legislation that we all think guarantors are going to be important, you know, especially as there are certain sectors now that we need to make sure that we allow into the property. And at the moment, as it's drafted, there's a big court case that says that guarantors can't be held to bound by an indefinite time frame. Well, a periodic tenancy by nature is an indefinite time frame. So they're going to have to make sure they put the right thing in the wording in the statute to make sure that we feel comfortable that we can, you know, utilise those guarantors. Allowing rent up front, to me, didn't look like the legislation allowed it, but Rachel McLean, in one of the letters to us, was very clear that she intended for that to be allowed. So some of these little bits that they need to kind of tidy up is what we're working on with them. Not long to go. That's Renters Reform Bill. Any questions on that? Have I overloaded you massively with it?
Yeah, is there any difference for like service apartments or things like that, or furnished properties?
Short lets, not furnished, but short lets do have different legislation. Well, they don't have as much, but they're working on it. I can't remember which bill it's under now. Levelling Up Bill is bringing more legislation into short lets, so it probably will align a lot more. But at the moment, short lets wouldn't. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think you can be for the same ride. Really, it's just sort of 12 months behind. So I've talked about EPCs, which is all good news. There you go, Levelling Up Bill, the short lets are getting new legislation. Other bits of things just to be aware of. We've had new guidance on damp and mould. Obviously, since there was that sad case, there has been a lot of emphasis on making sure that you know, we keep our properties from the main causes of damp and mould. One of the challenges with this is that the guidance that came out really has got the inference that damp and mould can't be caused by a tenant, and it can. So what I've done, and Davinder will have access to, is I've done a really sort of big, good checklist of everything that a landlord can do, the airflow tests, trickle vents, checking all those things. So what we will do is try and make sure that everything that we can do on behalf of the landlord has been done. So once we've exhausted all our list of everything that could be our fault, we can then have confidence to say, you know, we've done all of this. You know, we think maybe it's perhaps the fact that you're not turning the heating on and you're drying, you know, trying to dry laundry over a small heater. And actually, one of the things I would say is don't worry in those circumstances to involve the council. You know, we need to be in a situation where if it is caused by the way they're living, then we can take some action. So we try to kind of safeguard that for you a little bit. Leasehold and freehold reform. This is about really, if you have got a leasehold flat, that it's going to be cheaper and easier for you to get a much longer lease. And they are, again, continuing to move people to try and have the similar sort of rights to freehold as much as possible. That's coming in next year. Regulation of agencies seems to be kind of on the back burner, but we really do everything that a regulated agent would do, so we would welcome it and enjoy passing more exams than we'll be doing if we needed to, so that would be absolutely fine if it came in. And hopefully there won't be any exams for your landlords to pass, but you never know. And then material information is just the last bit, that just came in from the last few days, and really what that's about, people who are currently looking after properties themselves and haven't availed themselves of Davinda services yet, is you've got to give a lot more information up front when you're selling or letting a property, because otherwise you might breach the consumer protection regulations, and then you're at risk of them coming on and trying to get something out of you for sort of mis-selling what the property is. And there's very specific criteria now under this material information guidance note that the NSLAT team have come out with, which tells you what you should be displaying when you're advertising property for let. So even if you're in that, then you need to bone up on lots of different areas on that. Okay, just quick ones, just say don't forget your CO alarms, obviously on every floor, making sure that they're in place. Watch out for these disrepair issues. They are giving councils the same more power, and these rent repayment orders have got a longer potential. A higher amount of money with that 24-month issue. So do be proactive on your maintenance and keep good records of what you're trying to do. If you've got a tenant that is struggling to give you access or that kind of thing, keep really good records and get contractors to confirm, send photos when they try to go, that kind of thing, so that you can look after yourself. Deposit protection, we obviously all know that a tenant can make a claim of 3 times the deposit if you register it later than the 30 days. There is all sorts of paperwork that you've got to serve with that, and it's amazing how even really experienced agents forget to serve the right T's and C's at the right time alongside the prescribed information. So that's actually quite hard to get right all the time.
May I just ask, on this deposit protection, we were stung on that, probably similar to other people here, where the agent just paid insurance,
Yeah.
and then they went bust, and they'd taken about 10 million, and then we had to pay again. So we had to set it up again. How do we protect ourselves against the people who are arranging the deposit protection for us are actually keeping the money separate rather than just paying in insurance?
So what you can do...
For £75.
Yeah. If somebody's with a custodial scheme, that's what it's called, then the money will be held somewhere else. If it's in an insured scheme, then the agents are entitled to keep the money, but it should be covered by the insurance product, so there shouldn't have been any losses over.
Only if you keep the tenant out within 12 months.
I know that you're right, and I know the process, I've done it, and it is very difficult. Yeah, I mean,
situation, really.
Yeah, if I could mandate custodial, then I would, but that's just because I like to keep things out of temptation's way for everybody. But that's the thing to look out for. So if you ask an agent, are you with a custodial scheme or are you insured, that's the terminology to use.
Yeah, it's well worth it doing.
Yeah. And then obviously make sure you do your right to rent checks, make sure you've got your EPC, that it's in date when you're marketing the property, that it's a minimum of a level E, and that you've handed the tenant a copy before they move in. And there's all sorts of things around the paperwork and checklist. But if you're giving them and you're doing a move-in, this is for those that are still trying to do this game themselves, then make sure you get a checklist where they've signed to say they've received everything and you've got that signed and dated. Because that's what you're going to need to kind of give yourself evidence for.
Can I take up another point on EPCs?
Yeah.
I've used people for EPCs and they charge you a modest fee and they don't do the job. So I'm sure again we've all encountered this. Where they don't do the job properly. Perhaps they haven't even visited the property.
Yeah, that's why you need Davinda. Because they will make sure they do the job properly. But it is tough. It's tough to get good contractors. You know, it's tough to get. Yeah.
You know, there's no standard, is there?
Yeah.
Just to add to what Grace has said is that last year we were approached by, I don't know how it came about, but we were approached by a firm in Hemel Hempstead that had gone bust because their deposits were missing. This thing with deposits going missing it's borderline a scam, because what's happening is that estate agents and letting agents are allowed to have a client account. And when the interest rates were great, and they are good now as well as when they're high, they'd keep the deposits in that account, and then they would get interest. So a good firm with sort of 300-400 properties could have £1 million in the client account. Now, if they're not franchised, and we are franchised, so we get checked every year. So
To the penny.
To the penny, the internal auditor will come and check that the money's there, and then it's reconciled, and that we've not used somebody else's deposit to pay another person off. But when you're an independent firm, an independent lettings agent, nobody's checking you. So when times are tough, or you think you want to buy another property, or you want to use 100,000 from the pot, you can dip your hand in it and take it. And the firm that we were being offered to buy was missing £500,000 of their deposits.
And anyone can be a letting agent as well.
Yeah?
Because
Yeah.
right now, there's no exams or anything, anyone can set up a letting agent.
That's right. And letting agencies can be set up by anybody without any qualification. And money's going missing left, right and centre. In London, when I see a board, and I say London because the deposits are much bigger, when I see a board of an independent lettings agent that's got a couple of hundred properties, I can guarantee it that the money is not being checked. And the money is missing. And you're sitting on a time bomb. And what happened with this agent in Hemel Hempstead was, they went under, they took £500,000 with them. One of the partners was actually probably one of the genuine people in the business, and he actually had a heart attack because he found out that the money was missing. So this whole thing is heading in the direction where they're trying to fix the problems with it. But being with a good agent is absolutely vital. You get the right advice. The whole industry, the short-haul tenancy is going to completely disappear. We're going to have completely something different. And I have to rely on Grace writing to us to tell us exactly what to do next, because things are changing that quickly.
Can I just ask a question about that case? So I know which case you're talking about. Do we have an update on the liquidator and creditors list?
No,
priorities?
nothing's happened.
Nothing.
Nothing's happened. There's a list. You can join the list on the web of all the creditors who are going to get.
Yeah.
When I studied accountancy, they told me that if a client account goes missing, then you become a preferential creditor, which effectively means that you're ahead of everybody else. But when there is no money, what's the point of being a preferential creditor? So you're in a fix, and the landlords had to actually fork out the money and put it back in for the tenants. So tenants' deposits were missing, and the landlords had to put it back in.
And you were lucky if the tenant didn't insist on the 3 times.
Yeah.
They could have claimed that. Yeah.
And this thing about the tenants, this is the other thing, is I don't know how many of you manage your properties yourself, but the number of times I've had landlords come to me who manage their own properties, and you ask them, where's the deposit? Oh, I think the deposit's in my bank account. Did you protect it? I think I forgot to do that. That's immediately 3 times the value of the deposit is owed to the tenant straight away. If the tenant finds
Pay the
out.
deposit back to get them out if you want to get them out, yeah.
Something else that's said on the slides there, it's called rent repayment
Orders, yeah.
orders. Now, if you own an HMO and you have given your property, and I think I spoke to one of the landlords earlier on, he told me he'd given it to somebody for guaranteed rent. And that agent has forgotten to get the HMO license. And he's rented a couple of the rooms out as HMOs. That agent is collecting the money and then giving the landlord whatever's been agreed. So he's making a margin out of it. He stops managing it, or the tenants decide this doesn't have a license. They write to the Hatfield Council, Welland Hatfield Council, and say, we want our rent back. Guess who has to pay it? The landlord has to pay it. So the agent, there is recent legislation about agents now becoming, possibly you could make a claim on the agent, but I have seen landlords who've had to pay back up to a couple of years' rent to their tenants because the property wasn't registered as an HMO. Now they're trying to bring that into through the Rent Reform Act.
And one of the key things in the table amendments was exactly that they were making it clear the superior landlord could be liable for those rent repayment orders, which has been a bit grey there were some court cases actually that would go against that, but this is making it clear they will be able to.
Sorry to keep asking questions, but on this same point, that's the same point, but in my particular case, I advised the tenant what had happened. I didn't want to kick him out. So I took out an insurance policy, I forget the body now.
Like a deposit alternative, was it?
Yes, I think so. And then I will pay the tenant when he leaves. That's allowed, isn't it? That could, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as long, the tenant can choose to do the 3 times fine, as you say, as long as you've got an agreement with them,
Yeah.
then, you know, and you're obviously looking after him, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but, you know, that will be fine. It's very difficult with those circumstances, and the police aren't that interested most of the time, unfortunately, so, yeah.
Done?
Yes, thank you very much.
Right, well,
Thank you.
thanks. We'll overrun by about 15 minutes. If we can have a quick coffee and come back in, we'll do the next part of the seminar, tax element and then the TDS.